So this Section 230, like I said, is part of, I think is it the Digital Millennium Act?
I don't think it is.
Yeah, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
And
I
so
read something different.
230 was a way to protect the ability of platforms to provide user created content, essentially, whether that is comments on your blog or whether it's videos uploaded to YouTube, comments on YouTube, or stuff on Twitter. And it protects like Twitter, and it protects Google, and it protects you if you have your blog. And sounds like a very good idea. And I think for the most part, it is. Certainly, free speech absolutists say that it's a good thing. Now, the fact is that, of course, you don't have total free speech. These companies, the person who owns the blog can moderate it and block you from commenting. YouTube can say you violated our services and we're going to block you from commenting. Now, if I was back in the day, we had a blog associated with this show on Air America, Majority Report Radio.com. We never moderated, and we would get something like 30 or 40,000 unique visitors a day. We would get in an hour thousands of comments, because at that time there was no, there wasn't much going on and people hadn't associated with the radio. I never moderated because I was like, I don't care. And I had the ability to do that and not worry about it because I wasn't going to get sued for some moron going on there and saying, whatever, or some smart person going on there and saying whatever. It didn't matter. And to me, there was a lot of value in that. But if I blocked somebody on that site, it really wouldn't matter that much, because there's plenty of other places, particularly back then, where you could go and you could comment. Like, it's not like the Majority Report Radio was a utility.
Well, now we have,
unfortunately, exactly.
Twitter, Facebook have become public
YouTube.
utilities.
These things have become essentially utilities where so much of our media and our narrative and our conventional wisdom and our communication runs through these platforms. And
who are that big precisely because they asked to be by buying off politicians, specifically many Democratic politicians, in order to get that big and squash competition.
They took advantage of a
wild
change,
West.
Change that took place in our antitrust perspective, essentially, that took place, started in the 80s and has caught hold through the 90s. They took advantage of that and were basically, like you say, they were just happened to be, could have been something else, could have been some other. It didn't have to be YouTube. It could have been, I don't know, whatever their rival was at the time. It could have been Justin TV. Well, that ended up being Twitch. But it could have been, I can't remember what the names of the, Telestream or whatever it was.
Right.
It just so happens that it was YouTube. They got the financing, and then they became a monster, and they kept buying up all the stuff, and Google bought up all the stuff. Facebook bought up all their competitors, and Instagram and Amazon bought up all their competitors, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have these consolidations. And now to get banned or from one of these platforms really does actually mean something. And, what exactly it means, I don't know, but I definitely know it's more than getting banned from Majority Report Radio, let's say. And so we have a bit of a problem here, because I don't want, and I don't think society wants, people not to have a right to say what they want to say for the most part in these forums. Obviously within the bounds, but.
And especially if that determination is made by an arbitrary panel of executives at Twitter?
Well, they're doing that to a certain extent, but they would have to do it much more. And here's the thing, this is what would happen in practice, okay? If you got rid of 230, they would immediately have, I don't know, Trump is a bad example because maybe the relationship, because he's a president, but they would there would be a fraction of accounts left. Because any assertion and whatnot that it was even somewhat dubious, they could get sued for immediately. And smaller companies even more, right? Because then the slap suits, you could really just eliminate people and entities. It would involve them having to do a lot more real human moderation to have a business model. In fact, it would probably destroy the business model to a large extent. However, here's the dilemma. They're arguing they're a platform, not publishing. But they're not just a platform.
Yeah.
They're not, this is not a utility in terms of like, they're not agnostic like a utility. Like when we think of a utility, right? It's the phone lines. It is the internet. One of the reasons why we want net neutrality is because we do not want Verizon, say, to be anything except for just a common carrier versus someone with editorial control. And that editorial control that takes place on the internet would be, this service is better than that service. They may have a financial incentive in it. They certainly do.
Yes.
But they're still editorializing how that common carrier should work. YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, they editorialize every single day.
Right.
When I do this show, even if I was to deliver every story without an opinion, the stories that I choose to tell you are in and of itself editorial, right? I mean, I think 230 is important, but I'm not covering that story. And so there is an editorial decision that's being made there. And so I do think that there needs to be some tweak to 230, because to pretend that YouTube or Facebook or any of these platforms are just platforms, that they're not publishers in the sense that a publisher is relevant because they're making an editorial choice. I think what needs to happen is that you need to take away as much of that editorial control. If you're going to not give them liability, if you're going to shield them from liability, then they should not have any ability to exercise editorial control. Now, how does that editorial control exercise itself?
But I feel like the editorial control should be so limited as like if we're talking about public utilities, right? And say the internet is an example, or take TV, for example, when, we had public television stations, which I know they still exist, but it's much smaller. Those have small regulations where basically you can't use death threats, you can't say all of these things. And those regulations could be put in place by the government, not arbitrarily instituted by a panel of executives at Twitter and Facebook or something.
I disagree with that.
Okay,
because I don't want the government to get into that business, because then you're talking about First Amendment rights. And that gets a lot more problematic. I think what you need to do is you say to these platforms, okay, you want liability from what is uploaded? That's fine. You don't have the ability anymore, though. We are going to regulate your ability to suggest, to shape the viewing experience of your viewers.
Through the algorithm, but the government's getting involved there too, then.
That all they're saying is, we're not allowing you to take certain data from your viewers to track viewers or users. We're not allowing you to suggest stuff on there. If you want liability for what these people produce, then you don't get the right to push people to certain topics.
So you're saying if they want to be shielded from liability.
If you want to be shielded from liability, you also lose the ability to create algorithms to drive certain things. Now, what's going to happen if that happens? It is going to make their business significantly less profitable. Because the reason why they have algorithms like this is so that they have the ability to isolate and identify who viewers are, who users are, so they can sell ads against that.
And it's also addictive because say you're,
but they only care about it being addictive because
So
they're
they
going
can
to sell
sell the
ads.
ads. Yes.
And they could sell targeted ads. If you eliminate their ability to impose an algorithm to favor some content over others because of their algorithms or whatnot, whether they do it consciously or not, well, it's possible that Google doesn't do it consciously. They may do it reactively and say like, okay, we're not necessarily pushing stuff. I'm just going to give them the benefit.
But there's like, they're aware of the consequences.
Of course,
There's a million
of
think
course,
pieces
of course,
and movies and
of
whatever.
course. But if you eliminate their ability to actually in any way influence the flow of your interaction with that platform, right? That is content agnostic. And if it's going to genuinely be content agnostic, then you cannot impose upon the viewer any type of stream that they can follow. It's going to eliminate that company's ability to monetize at the level that they're doing. It's going to shrink the company. It's going to allow competitors to pop up because all of a sudden, like, it's going to be just as profitable for me maybe to be on Parler as it is on Twitter or whatever. And
yeah, I mean, a lot of
as
your
a content producer,
a lot of your arguments seem to be more tailored to like YouTube and what you're talking about.
Well, Facebook.
And Facebook, but like Twitter and censorship in that area, which is clearly what Trump is obsessed over here, I think is a different ballgame.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Twitter, I think,
that's more direct free speech expression, less monetizable content. This is just making claims. And so people getting arbitrarily banned from there, I think the threshold for something like Twitter, as opposed to media and more monetizable content, I know you can still monetize on Twitter, but I think that needs to be a whole separate conversation because that involves free speech protections and a panel of people with Jack and whoever making a decision. Oh, we're going to ban Milo Yiannopoulos. We're going to ban this. We're going to flag Trump's tweets. I understand the concerns about that, and I think those are legitimate.
I think there's just a lot less bar to entry for in places like Twitter. I mean, Twitter, I'm thinking, but it is true. I'm thinking Facebook. I'm thinking Amazon and Twitch and all of the things that Amazon owns. But Twitter does push content. There's no doubt.
I know.
And
yeah.
and I think if you eliminate the ability of these companies to push content, because that's what publishing is, right? I mean, just because what was the HuffPost when it started? It was just an aggregator.
Yeah.
It's just pushing people to content. They don't even necessarily generate it. And so I think if you're going to get that liability protection, then you do not have the ability to push your users to any content. They've got to find it on their own, and that's it. And I think what that does is it makes it less profitable for them and it makes it harder for them to grow and become the dominant player in a sphere. And then the implications of being banned from Twitter become far less. They don't become utilities. The technology becomes a utility, but these platforms themselves don't become utilities.
I just go more down what Elizabeth Warren was proposing about breaking them up more in a traditional monopoly sense or antitrust sense, where you're not just, kind of regulating their algorithm, because I do think there is some value in, like, I watch the Majority Report. Maybe I'm interested in David Pakman's show, right? Or something like that, or TYT or whatever. I think there's user value in that. And I don't know if that's a significant enough trait. Like, I think you can break up their power in different ways without sacrificing a user experience.
Well, I think the idea in that instance is like, if you're gonna like the Majority Report and I'm gonna suggest to you watch the David Pakman show, then I got to make sure that I was gonna say Pakman's not stealing his set or something like that, but I got to make sure that I got to have if I'm gonna serve you up something, I've got to make sure that it's not something that's going to cause me liability, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like that's I don't know. I think that is it's something. It's a conversation that we have to have. I want to bring somebody on to have this conversation because it is quite possible that a more direct antitrust type of approach achieves the same thing without getting into that, without sacrificing that user
That's
experience.
more of where I stand.
But I don't know, like Netflix, right? Like they're able to provide that user experience and they take responsibility for what they're putting on there.
No, yeah,
It's not user-generated
shows
content.
are different, but like also they have algorithms that track what people
Absolutely,
watch.
but they also know that like you're not.
You can't put like
Yeah, exactly. It's not
revenge
user
porn on
content.
there.
Exactly,
Yeah, right.
exactly. Anyways, here is Tom Cotton. This guy, Tom Cotton, is maybe the most disingenuous person in the entire Senate.
Also, maybe the most frightening.
And because of that, the most frightening. I mean, here's a guy, Harvard Law, I mean, just Ivy League elite and
Well, he has an Arkansas draw.
constantly deploying this. And here he is on, and they're talking about 230 for intimidation purposes rather than anything else. Here he is on with Ainsley Earhart on Fox and Friends.
Let's talk about the defense bill because the president was tweeting out he is going to veto it unless Section 230 is repealed. He tweeted out, he said,
pause it for 1 second.
Section 230, which is
regardless of my nuanced take on 230, I hope that Donald Trump vetoes the defense bill. I hope that happens. I would be happy for that. I think we should continue to veto defense bill.
Yeah. Biden should keep that in his back pocket.
Exactly.
Right.
But go back to the beginning. I just want to make that clear. There's one thing like broken clock type of situation.
He tweeted out, he said, Section 230, which is a liability shielding gift from the U.S. to big tech, the only companies in America that have it, corporate welfare, is a serious threat to our...
Pause it for 1 second. I'm sorry. I know it's annoying. But gun manufacturers also have that corporate liability. Pharma does too for its vaccines, but at least there's a sort of an arguable public health policy behind it. But continue.
National security and election integrity. Our country can never be safe and secure if we allow it to stand. Therefore, if the very dangerous and unfair Section 230 is not completely terminated as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, I will be forced to unequivocally veto the bill when sent to the very beautiful Resolute desk. Take back America now. Thank you. Why is it that social media is so protected from liability?
Well, there shouldn't be, Ainsley. Section 230 dates back to the very dawn of the internet in the 1990s when these companies were very small, very fragile startups, and we wanted to establish America as the world leader in the internet. That's not the case now. Some of these companies are the biggest and most powerful corporations in the history of the world. They don't just control, for instance, the flow of oil the way Standard Oil once did. They control the flow of information. Look what's happening in those Georgia races. Some of these companies are still prohibiting election ads on their platforms now that more than a month after the last election. That's in part because they don't want Republicans reaching people across the state of Georgia. That's why we need to get rid of Section 230. These companies can't say on the one hand that they're just a neutral platform and therefore they should be immune from any kind of liability, but on the other hand, also say that they get to change or edit or curate or censor content from conservatives across America. We can't allow that and we shouldn't allow it.
Are they just censoring Republican ads?
Yeah,
they're allowing Democratic ads.
This is another case of Trump. I mean, Cotton does. Matt, did you want to say something?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is another case of Trump taking a kernel of truth, which is like the nuanced conversation we were having earlier about Section 230, and twisting it to make his own narrative. And like, that's what he was so effective at in 2016. Like, oh, it's the swamp, but that's why you should put me in charge. Right. The issues were what we discussed earlier about 230. He's saying that it's rigged against Republicans when all empirical data about social media sites and the algorithms and what it's created and the fake news and the misinformation, which will always be around, but on these social media sites, there has been, because of the algorithms, a toxic shareability that has infected people's minds and is no longer discernible from real things. Like, that's what the actual issue is here. And Cotton and Trump are pretending like it's rigged against them when everything that we've seen has shown that it's actually very much rigged in their favor and has been quite helpful to Trump, to Republicans, in order to muddy the waters and make sure that people don't understand what's true and what's not true.
There is no world in which things are rigged against conservatives and Dan Bongino is the top shared news site on Facebook 20 times over.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Think of how much should be shared if it wasn't rigged against him.
Oh my God. He would be, I mean, I don't even know. I have no idea on how big Dan Bongino could really be. But that is a perfect example of Tom Cotton, like you say, taking a kernel of truth, twisting it to conservative aggrievement, which all roads lead back there.
They're the biggest victims ever.
And this is, on some level too, what it is like, look, these tech companies, they are massive. He is right. At the beginning of this thing, it was something that was done to protect these companies. We should have prevented them from getting this big and powerful. You could maintain that same protection on 230. And prevented them from doing all the things that have made them so large, like buying other companies, buying out competitors, tracking data in such a way that they become these behemoths, having ad sales, and basically bringing back the problems that existed why we had Sin Fin laws. This all can come back in some type of antitrust regime. I'm not convinced, frankly, that inhibiting algorithms in some fashion, right? Maybe you still want to provide some user experience, but in doing these deep digs on data on people isn't part of an antitrust regime. I mean, part of this is about regulating and cutting off different divisions of the company from itself, so that they don't have the ability to trade this information. I mean, that one time in this country, up until the Clinton administration, you could not, and this was in TV as well, but it started out with movies. You could not own a movie studio and theater company, because they didn't want a situation where it's like, I'm MGM and I'm making, whatever it is, bullets over Broadway, and only putting it in these theaters. And we had that in television for a long time, where if I'm NBC Productions, I could not make my own TV shows. I would have to get those from a studio that was separate, because we wanted the ability to have more companies and access to these outputs. Now we have cable, so they became less relevant in the context of TV. We did have a short period where the TV was garbage, but cable opened up the opportunities for people. But
I think, part of why we're not having as sophisticated of a conversation about this in Congress is, like, there have been many instances that show how tech illiterate, like, the very elderly Senate is and the very elderly House.
I wonder if I still have that.
Yeah, what is that clip? Was it Feinstein or somebody trying to understand, like...
Inhofe was saying that the internet is a series of tubes.
Yeah, right, or things like that. I mean, there's zero understanding of how algorithms work or how the internet functions. And, so I thought Warren's bill is a start there, but maybe we came to some perfect agreement there where it's not elimination of sharing algorithms and, like, just, but maybe a tweaking that limits their addictiveness or their potency.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's we'll see. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about that. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about that a lot, because there's not going to be a whole lot that Joe Biden's going to be able to do, even if they get the Senate, because Joe Manchin will stop a lot of it. But antitrust is an area where we've talked to David Dane about this. We've done many interviews on antitrust, but the prospect specifically has outlined how you don't need legislation to fundamentally alter and basically, go back to it was late Ted Stevens, right? Not Inhofe. It was Ted Stevens who said this series of tubes. You don't need new legislation to get back to the way that antitrust used to be in this country.